All right, here we go. This is the System Failure Podcast number 65.
65, a nice round figure, and we have a jam-packed episode for you today. In the studio is friend of the show, Sir Christopher Meyer. Say hello to the System Failure listeners, sir.
Speaking of nice round figures, here I am. I'm delighted to return to the pod, guys. Thanks for having me.
That's Meyer, a.k.a. the Libertarian.
All right. Well, gentlemen, we've got some hot topics for conversation today, so I suggest we get started. No time like the present, eh? Brian, take it away.
Okay. All right. Well, so I just wanted to follow up a little bit. We were talking about the emotions inspired by Titanic, the movie, last time. And so I guess it had me broader thinking more broadly about, like, you know, what it means to be a simp and how not to be a simp, right?
Yeah, maybe a brief recap would be you were watching the Titanic movies, you recognized some archetypes that were missing from your own life, and you were like, WTF, man.
Yeah, well, you want to be like a winner like Jack and not a loser?
I feel like Kaladin Hockley is the real winner in that movie. I mean, the dude first of all, didn't die. I mean, not until the Great Depression. He was like an all-around winner. And his one ask of his fiance was not to go whoring below decks. He didn't even lay hands on her. I mean, the man was clearly upset. He upturned the wicker breakfast table, but he's like, I just need you to not be publicly whoring if you possibly could. You don't have a lot of demands of you. I'm going to pay for your whole life, you know?
So I'll admit I didn't catch up on your last episode, so I don't know if you've covered this, but one of the ways that I enjoy interpreting that film is that the story that Rose tells is more or less entirely fabricated because it's being told from the perspective of an 84-year-old woman on her deathbed.
Well, it is funny. She's rebelling against like a stifling life of like parties and get-togethers with her like rich people, and it just sounds so awful.
I could see my life as if I'd already lived it. An endless parade of cotillions and dinner parties. God, yeah, it sounds like the 7th level of Dante's Inferno to me.
She's a little bit like a female Holden Caulfield in that way. Like
wait, what is that character from? Holden Caulfield. Why do I know that name?
Catcher in the Rye.
Of course.
The stereotypical teenage nihilist that we all identified with at 16. It sort of strikes me in this conversation that's who Rose is. She was born in a position of privilege, sort of lacked the ability to conform to it, and saw everybody around here as big fat phonies.
That's true. Yes, and the movie it's a very American look at class structure, as if it doesn't matter, or maybe the lower classes secretly have it better with their beer party, and they're dancing. It's like, yeah, no, I don't think that these people do. They're all going to America to work in the sweatshops of New York City. It's not going to be they're going to be living in a tenement apartment with no exterior windows. It's not going to be great. I mean, you definitely can party. You're definitely going to want to party hard if your tenement has no windows, but. Anyhow, we did also pour out a shot for Rose's husband of 75 years, who didn't get a mention in her, as she reunites with her lover Jack in the afterlife there at the end of the film, and
throws a priceless artifact worth tens of millions of dollars deep into the ocean. Like at some point in her life, you have to think in the average American life through the 20th century, like maybe that kind of wealth and asset might have been useful to her family, but
particularly during the 30s, as mentioned.
Well, anyway, so one of the coworkers at my job, he just tells a story. Well, he just used to be in the Navy, and he and all his Navy buddies were taking whatever like the steroids were at the time. They're all like juiced up and stuff, and then so they come into port, and go whoring at the bars, basically, and so, they'd get some girls or whatever, and, they'd be hooking up. And then they always had, like, this one friend who was, like, trying to get the girls' numbers and, like, he would, like, fall in love with them, basically.
Right, initiate a relationship where, like, he would go down the path that ultimately ends in marriage and kids and all that. But with all these floozies from the bars, is that what the story is?
Yeah, and the floozies were just trying to, like, hook up with, the juiced-up Navy guys and obviously weren't interested in that kind of thing, right? So that's what you might call some classic simp behavior, right? And so I was just thinking, I guess I found the story relatable because that's like what would happen to me, right? if I went out to the bar, if I started hooking up with some girl who, especially one who I thought was hot, right? I would definitely like be trying to figure out how I can, anchor this chick down, right? And so I guess my epiphany about the nature of symptom, right, is that I guess men or whatever, there's just like a mountain to climb, right? Or for most of my life, I just, I dealt with a lot of like self-loathing and like body image issues. And I was like trying not to talk to people. And so, well, like one thing is that like I've been listening to a lot of like, charisma podcasts and whatnot on YouTube, and there's all kinds of people like Robert Greene. I've been reading his book, The Art of Seduction, and well, anyway,
48 Laws of Power, and Dr. Green's, most famous epistle.
Yeah, I do plan to read that. That's on the reading list here. It is funny because Robert Greene, he's like this old guy who's had a stroke, and you wouldn't expect him to have like great opinions on these sort of like the topics of like power and seduction and whatnot. But I mean, it's like a well-researched book, and he talks about like Casanova and Don Juan and whatnot, and he's got all kinds of like fascinating opinions, and he's really figured it out somehow. You just wouldn't expect it based on like kind of the way he looks and talks. And so anyway, I think it was not, it was I think on Chris Williams' podcast, but they were talking about Russell Brand, and basically what he does is he just flirts with everyone, right? Like, and you can just, his conversational prowess is like unbeaten. He's just like a super charming guy. And like, how does he do that? Well, he flirts with like everyone, like men, women, young or old. He has like, he just tries to charm them like no matter who it is, right? And that's really like the kind of practice, like we all want to be like that, right? Like no one like wants to be like a simp. It just like you have these emotions.
It comes from unconfidence, right? It makes you. It's like women get like if you went to a used car lot and the salesman was really eager to push one particular car, you would suddenly start backtracking and feeling like, wait, why is this person trying to push this car on me? Now I'm not sure I want it. It's like the opposite of that feeling that like a Black Friday sale slipping through your fingers. So the opposite of that is being force fed, and you're like, I'm not sure I want that.
Right. So for me, like, if some like girl starts showing me like any kind of attention, right, I'll feel like I love them, which is like a ridiculous feeling. And like, why do I feel that way? Right. And I guess what I think what symptom is really being a simp, is really about is, like just what this female validation means is that you're kind of like good the way you are and that you don't need to climb this mountain. Right. And so I guess that validation is like is the problem, right? So you gotta focus on like climbing the mountain, right? And that's like the cure to the symptom in the body image issues, right? Does that make sense?
It does. So your contention here is that it feels good to be relieved of the duty to have to climb Mount Difficult. And if you can just get approval when you're in the foothills, you don't have to go through the harrowing climb. That makes sense. But honestly, what you're saying resonates with me more like it feels, and maybe it's just another way of saying the exact same thing, but it feels like abundance versus scarcity mindset.
Well, yes. And just there's like a tangled knot because like you like want to like, or at least I like I want to tell like some girl that I love her or whatever. But like why do I want to, like, it's so confusing because you feel these strong emotions and like, you realize that like is my love like this poisoned or corrupted thing, and really that's not what it is. I guess this is why it's useful to me. I guess it's not that like my love or whatever is like a bad thing. It's just that like what it means is that just in terms of like not having to climb this mountain, it's such like a fantasy or whatever, right?
Yeah.
And so it's just no wonder that like it doesn't translate, like it doesn't actually work out to like a fulfilling relationship with someone, right?
It sort of strikes me that part of the framing I'm hearing from you is that you're framing attaining a relationship as a goal to work toward, like you're viewing that as part of the mountain you're climbing. And the reason I'm latching onto that is I've undergone similar self-reflection myself, and I found that when I'm interacting with others, I look a lot for their validation in a lot of things, and I draw a lot of my self-identity from my judgment of how others view me, which is a complicated sentence.
Yeah. And so like we did talk about in the last podcast, but like the validation from women comes from climbing the mountain. It doesn't come from any shortcuts, right? Or like that's like something to look forward to, like as you ascend the dizzying heights, right? And
if you want to reduce it to your most like base impulses, the litany of hot women that you'll attract as you climb that mountain are they're like different base camps to get to. If that's your focus and your motivation, you can conceptualize it that way.
And each base camp improves in quality too.
Yeah. So I guess it was just I guess thinking about things in that way is kind of like a relief, right? It doesn't mean there's something like fundamentally wrong with me. And so I had like the 3-point plan, I believe, last time, which was like positive self-talk and then no negative self-talk. And part of not having negative self-talk is not like pathologizing yourself. And so this breakthrough, I no longer have to pathologize my love as some poisonous thing. I can just frame it. I can just see what's going on now. This is the epiphany, right? So it's kind of a big deal.
I have like, I don't have any notes really other than to agree. That sounds like a really healthy mindset. I think that when you go into an interaction with a young lady and you can't bear the thought of failure, that is not a good situation for her to be in. She wants you to take her, if she needs to reject you, she wants you to take it make it easy for her, right? You have to be willing to take no for an answer, in other words. And if no means that you're unworthy of being loved, well, then it's going to be a catastrophe every single time, and you're going to dread possibly getting rejected. You just gotta get rejected a few 100,000 times, and after a while, it's no big deal at all. And that comfort, right? The young lady, she's not, like I said, she's not going to want it to be a disaster for you if she rejects you. That makes her life much more complicated, and it's also repulsive.
Yeah. So the 3-point plan: the positive self-talk, no negative self-talk, and then the third point is to cultivate being someone that you yourself, so you can like love yourself. So you're trying to cultivate like virtuous qualities, and then. So now I've got a 4-point plan, and the fourth part of that, and maybe it kind of falls in with the third, but it's something I'm actively pursuing, is just trying to like flirt with everyone, basically.
There you go. Yeah,
so with that in mind, I want to say both of you guys look very handsome today.
Hey, right back at you, buddy. Not to harsh your mellow, but for the sake of maybe asking a constructive question, what is it about Russell Brand and this philosophy of flirting with everything do you find attractive? Is it the liberation? Is it the possibility of fun sex? What is it that's drawing you to it?
Man, the biggest thing is just that I've always like felt like afraid to approach people. Mm-hmm. And one thing that I've also been hearing making the YouTube rounds here with these charisma podcasts is you have like if you have a high internal threshold for like what you feel is worth saying to anyone, and when you feel under pressure, like you feel like you have to hit home runs in like everything that you say, and what you want to do is lower that filter, and the way to do that is just like to practice talking to people, right? And then through doing that, you can have comfortable conversations with people.
Yeah, and you can focus on what to say rather than on conquering the anxiety and focusing on that. Yeah, definitely.
Okay. and so I just have one more idea on all this. Well, I am going to Prague here, which we're going to discuss a little bit later in the podcast. And so, yeah, I guess like, I used to be, somewhat overweight back in high school, right? And so like having I definitely had like self body image issues and, all kinds of self-loathing problems. So I think my next plan, I think the next trip I take after Prague in like 6 months or so is I'm definitely going to go to like some kind of like nudist resort.
All right, Sandals, Jamaica. Book the trip.
I don't think Sandals is a nudist.
Is it not? It's definitely a hookup place, but it may not be nudist. You're right.
It can be if you pay enough.
All right. Well, anyway, so I think that's what I have in mind is my next crazy endeavor after going to Prague here.
Well, it's just the thing to pass the frigid New England winter. Head on down to some tropical climes and remove your threads. That's going to be awesome. Yeah.
It's amusing. I've felt I felt as I've experienced yoga more regularly, and Brian, I know you have some similar interests. That sort of comfort with other people's bodies is coming along with being in those kinds of environments more. Not nude, obviously, but there's not a lot of secrets from people that you're either fight training with or practicing yoga with. So I don't know if there's something to be said for that of going into those sessions with a non-lecherous eye for people's bodies.
Well, I mean, I've been like struggling with these issues since like high school, and I am now 36, and basically I felt like after like, decades of beating my head against the wall, to actually like be making some kind of progress on these issues is extremely exciting.
Position isn't so important. It's trajectory that matters. If you're headed up, you feel great. If you're headed down, you feel not so great.
Well, that feeling of like going nowhere is what's really undermining to one's sense of well-being, in my opinion.
Man, well, you sound great. I'm thrilled to hear all this, Brian. I think that's pretty awesome. It sounds like you're finally getting the tools in your toolbox that have been long missing, so that's very gratifying to hear.
Yes. All right, well, I guess that's it for my follow-up on the Titanic podcast, unless there's anything else we want to add.
I would just I would encourage you to simp for nobody but yourself. That process of self-love is important.
Nice. All right.
Well, with that, we've invited our dear friend, Sir Christopher Meyer, into the podcast to discuss a recent political scandal. Sir Meyer, why don't you take it away?
Well, so, it's really hard to even know where to start. A news update that became public today, the day that we're recording this pod, is that as of today, the Biden White House has pardoned Hunter Biden for any and all crimes. The language seemed to imply known and unknown crimes for a specific date range dating back to about 2012, which
God, what was going on in 2014?
So like my rage is simmering because there are so many threads of righteous anger to pull. As a career libertarian and as a person who has for a time admired the Democratic Party for being the better of the two choices with respect to moral and ethical issues, I think that day is long over, and I'm.
Hang on a second here.
Whoa.
You sat through the 2016 election with Donna Brazile writing in her memoirs about how they had specifically conspired to cheat Bernie, right? And Debbie Wasserman Schultz having to step down as the DNC chair. And then you sat through 2020 where Barack Obama worked behind the scenes in March of 2020 to get all of the non-Bernie candidates to drop out, with the exception of like Elizabeth Warren stay in, everyone else drop out all at once, and everyone endorsed Biden so we can push Biden across the finish line despite him being in like sixth place or something after Iowa, New Hampshire, Nevada, after those, it was coming into Super Tuesday. Everyone except for, leave Warren in so that she'll split that, that progressive lefty vote.
And despite everyone knowing that there's no way Biden could make it through like 4 more years.
Right. Yeah.
It's obvious. So it's not that I was blind to those issues. I howled pretty loud about those, but I am, let's put it this way. I am eager to remind my registered Democrat friends of those exact same moments, as clear indicators that the party that they loved and admired and were culture locked into is not what they thought it would be.
Yeah. Yes.
Well, the broad nature of the pardon, it makes you wonder what other crimes that Hunter Biden has committed. But we'll see. I do wonder about your libertarian values here, Meyer, because it seems like his crime is doing crack, and I would think as a libertarian, that would probably not be something you want to imprison people for.
Well, so I have multiple layers of views on this. I think in big picture, nobody's asked me for my white male perspective, but here it is. Hunter Biden is a wealthy son of a powerful man who committed some crimes, was prosecuted for those crimes because of his relative fame, if you want to call it that, because of the power for those crimes to hurt other people. And certainly when I say prosecuted for crimes, I don't just mean in criminal courts. I mean in a sort of this sort of public court. He's been attacked pretty deliberately and pretty mercilessly, brutally, and he also happens to be obviously a criminal who's committed some crimes. So I have twisted feelings about Hunter Biden's elevation to our national conversation. I don't give a shit about the guy. He's not part of our political leadership. He, at the risk of being crude, he's a crackhead that bought a gun. There's a lot of those, to your point. He's being prosecuted, or he's being elevated to this stage because of his connection to the Biden family. And that's ugly, but I'm also not opposed to it because here's another libertarian mindset. Given that we don't have enough resources to prosecute every crime we can possibly find, we absolutely should be starting at the top. Something that I resent the Biden administration diluting with this pardon is the idea that our government should be held accountable. With this pardon, Joe Biden has placed a rubber stamp on the idea that the family members of people in our government are untouchable. And no registered Democrat should ever have any reason to doubt that that's true.
Well, I mean, I do feel like the powers that be behind the scenes are perfectly happy to execute public officials if and when needed. Obviously, the 1960s is, Exhibit 1A on that front. But yeah, I generally understand what you're saying.
I suppose I would say that the thing I'm trying to talk around is the thing that I'm angry about is that the right has been howling about Donald Trump's perceived persecution. And I want to use that word persecution, not prosecution, but his individualized persecution at the hands of weaponized government. And that's been, I think, to an extent genuine and to an extent an elaborate bit of noise that he's been creating to defend himself. Seeing the Biden administration so openly and nakedly just accepting that state of affairs and then using it for their own benefit is supremely disappointing. So as my libertarian, in my token libertarian capacity here, that's where my disappointment lies.
Well, Biden did come out and say, Biden Sr. A bunch of times that he was not going to pardon Hunter Biden, and so it's a bit shocking that he's done it. But I couldn't be any more nonplussed and unsurprised, and obviously he was going to pardon Hunter. Someone was going to pardon Hunter, so. It doesn't move the needle a whole lot for me.
Yeah, this feels like small potatoes corruption to me. This is just I feel like we're way past the part where I would even raise an eyebrow to this. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's yet another example. But I mean, Joe Biden, the Biden administration couching the attempt at student loan forgiveness during the COVID year, you may recall, they used the 2020 HEROES Act as the justification to suggest that the legal rationale for why the executive has the power to cancel this debt. And there's a website called debtcollective.org, which is all about, organizing debtors, student loan debtors. And they had all these articles on their website about how they sent representatives to the White House to explain to the Biden staff that you cannot use the 2020 HEROES Act as a legal justification. It's going to be thrown out of court instantly. You need to go to the 1965 Higher Education Act, which gives you unilateral power to cancel any and all education debt. But they didn't do that because this is all about show, right? Same with Obama matriculating into the presidency in 2008 with both houses of Congress, having promised on the campaign trail to codify Roe v. Wade, and just being it's not and then once you get in, just be it's not really a priority. This is because they want that football in play.
And to your point, the Biden Department of Ed has made some changes, and I would call them improvements to our student lending situation. They've through either executing existing programs or creating new programs, they have forgiven big chunks of debt for lots of borrowers in very focused communities, teacher student loan forgiveness or economic hardship forgiveness. There's a number of conceptual programs that hadn't been well executed that the Biden administration is now for a short period of time executing that is delivering some aid to borrowers in need, but it's certainly not the broad debt forgiveness that people expected. Yeah,
they're picking at these are just small little tiny
little tastes
at the edges, and it's but you could easily just benefit the working class overnight. It's not and then of course I think it's also worth the Biden administration, the International Criminal Courts issued this past week a warrant for the arrest of Netanyahu, for the crime of genocide. And the Biden administration has been supporting this genocide. And not only that, but even my favorite candidates, the RFK Juniors, would still support arming Israel. So it's there is no level of corruption that I can't imagine the Democrats stooping to. They're willing to be complicit in a genocide. I feel like pardoning political family members. That's just some dust off the shoulder. But that was my reaction.
Well, I think the thing that I will take forward in my political discourse is reminding people that the kayfabe, if you will, is gone. The kayfabe being that old wrestling term for the show that the characters put on for the sake of the dum-dums in the audience. This dramatic theater of a party being a party of law and order or of making America better or of change or progress is obviously exposed.
I think the kayfabe is still there, but it's layered with reality. So you've got kayfabe, and you've got low level of reality, and you've got more kayfabe, and it just becomes utterly confusing, right? The mixture of kayfabe and reality you just can't tell where one ends and the other begins. That's what I think we're seeing.
Well, what I saw on Reddit is that the sentiment is still that Trump is Hitler, and anyone who thinks otherwise has something seriously wrong with him.
Well, it's a remarkably low level of political analysis, but it is extant on Reddit.
Can I share a final thought on this?
Absolutely,
because
please.
it's a rough thread to pull. The specific date range of the pardon is curious, and the internet is obviously swimming about this. So by the time your listeners hear this, the answers may already be out there. But Biden had the authority to issue a pardon that was far more broad ranging. Could have simply given Hunter a lifetime pardon for any and all crimes. But he specifically chose a date range that is curious, and I'm not going to specifically point to an event, but I will say that the range was chosen specifically, and it seems to line up with the time period that Hunter Biden was trading on his father's access as vice president in Ukraine. Not that this has anything to do with the modern conflict, but that was a time period when Hunter Biden may or may not have been involved in crimes, and the Biden administration made a very calculated choice to pardon him for a specific time period where he would have been responsible for that. The really ugly thing here is it's not going to stop this from coming out. I think the Marjorie Taylor Greenes or the MAGA-verse, if you want to lump them all together, will happily continue to expose Hunter Biden. They've already exposed his penis. I think the tragedy here is that Hunter is now protected from jail time for this, but it's still going to be an ongoing conversation because now the right has this fucking mallet that they can hammer the left with to say, well, look what you did for Hunter.
I don't think that the right was short on ammo in its arsenal with which to criticize the Democrats. I mean, obviously the election results this past month speak to that concisely. Conclusively, that's the word I'm looking for, not concisely. Conclusively, yeah.
Well, the Donald Trump administration will be kind of a big disappointment if all kinds of stuff doesn't come out from the Doge committee. Just all kinds of things about the government hopefully will come to light here, and we can grow from this.
We should be able to tell just how co-opted the Donald administration, just how contained is the whole Donald phenomenon here. We'll be able to see over the next 4 years. It'll be pretty obvious, I'm sure.
It'll be entertaining.
All right, well, is that all we have to say about the unfortunate Master Biden and his many misdeeds? I think maybe one, there was also a specific Hunter Biden email that was not from Burisma, the Ukrainian gas company, but was from one of his other no-show jobs. This one in Hong Kong or China, not that there's much difference anymore, but it was specifically talking about kicking a share of a share of whatever the bribe was upstairs to the big guy, and that was the word in the email, the big guy. So, I mean, this is really... Yeah, so I mean, I think that, to your point, I don't think that pardoning Hunter Biden is going to make this thing go away, but it does rescue both father and son from further legal jeopardy. So very self-serving on that front.
Must be nice.
Yeah, I can't imagine. All right, well, as mentioned, our co-host Brian is headed off to Bohemia tomorrow, which is going to be awesome. And so I thought maybe the thing to do would be to talk. I had a chance to visit Prague in 2023, and it was an incredible experience. So what I want to do here is put a little bed of music behind all the things I have to talk about. And, of course, this bed of music will be Czech native son Bedřich Smetana and his famous My Blaster, My Country, and you all will probably recognize this music. It's it's one of these classic pieces of classical music, if you'll forgive the parlance.
So we will hold our comments and questions.
No. By all means, chime in whenever you need to. Yeah, please. Please, if you have questions or clarifications, it's so much better to have the tennis ball moving than to just have me hitting, practicing serve here. Definitely preferred. Okay, so without further ado, I will now start the aforementioned music.
Take it away.
Okay. Now, it's my considered opinion, and I may just be fooling myself, but I feel like, I always make this comment when I drive to Boston and New York City, I feel like you can psychically feel the energy of the city as you approach it, on the highway when you first turn the corner and you see the Boston skyline or the New York skyline. It's always an interesting moment from a psychic perspective. And I swear if I was blindfolded, I would know I was approaching the city. And so now I want to take you to the dark heart of Bohemia, right, to Czechia, where the city of Prague lies in the middle of this beautiful country on the Vltava River. And the music you're hearing in the background here is music that is just, it's like the tune that defines Prague. You will hear this played on the streets of Prague. Maybe that melody sounds familiar.
It's beautiful.
I would say it sounds vaguely familiar.
Yeah. Prague is, the people there are Slavic, like the Russians or the Yugoslavians, and so they're not like the Hungarians are not. The Hungarians are from the steppes, like Attila the Hun or Genghis Khan, but the Czechia is the farthest east that Slavic civilization goes. Right? It's like a mixture between German and Slavic civilization. It's a land of fairy tales and revolt against authority and bravery and medieval knights in shining armor and beautiful women. Prague got its real kickstart in 1355 when it first became the seat of power. The seat of power for the Holy Roman Emperor. The famous Holy Roman Emperor Charles IV made it for the first time the capital of the Holy Roman Empire. Now, what is the Holy Roman Empire? Well, the Holy Roman Empire began in the year 800 when Pope Leo X, snuck up behind Charlemagne and placed the crown on his head. Charlemagne, it was Christmas Day, and Charlemagne had arrived in Rome to celebrate his Christmas, to celebrate Christmas at Old St. Peter's Basilica, the one erected by Constantine the Great, not the modern Michelangelo Raphael version. And when he was there, the Pope snuck up behind him and put the crown on his head, thereby coronating him as this new Holy Roman Emperor. It was a throwback to the old days of the Roman Empire. This is Rome, the old capital of Rome. They had the purple garb and the olive garland on the head. And then they did the old oath that Caesar would take upon seizing power. And the Holy Roman Empire lasted all the way up until Napoleon disposed of it in 1812. And then it was replaced by the Austro-Hungarian Empire, as you all may know, and that lasted up until World War I. So, back to 1355, King Charles IV, as the Holy Roman Empire, he built this famous bridge, Charles Bridge, over the Vltava River. It's got all kinds of statues lining it. If you've played any video game that takes place in Prague, you've been on this bridge. It's iconic, and it's the center of town. He also built Prague Castle, which we'll talk more about in a little bit. And inside within the confines of Prague Castle lies St. Vitus's Cathedral. St. Vitus's is one of the premier Gothic examples of a Gothic cathedral in Europe. It's right up there with Notre Dame or the Cathedral at Chartres. It's got everything. It's got, Roman architecture is typified by that Roman arch, right? But Gothic architecture is typified by the pointed arch and extreme verticality, flying buttresses, stained glass windows. You all can picture it. It's like straight out of a fairy tale. And of course, it's worth mentioning that there are all kinds of magical symbols all over the city of Prague. You'll be looking for obelisks, pyramids, and the all-seeing eye. The things that are on the back of our $1 bill. So Charles IV was preceded by King Wenceslas. Do you all remember that song? The Christmas song, good King Wenceslas first looked out on the feast of Stephen. That song. That's like a 9th century Sicilian saint or something. I don't know that. But Wenceslas is like this. It's like the name of famous kings, and you'll visit Wenceslas Square, which is like a famous place where all kinds of political demonstrations happen, right on up till the Velvet Revolution and the fall of communism. Wenceslas Square plays a huge role.
I would imagine Prague was a center of. This is a reductive statement, but I would imagine Prague, as the seat of the Holy Roman Empire in that period of time, was a space for interesting cultural exchange, specifically between Prague and Constantinople, as the prototypical Christian sects were starting to expand and spread and then fragment in the way they did. Prague to Constantinople must have been a very interesting highway of culture and ideas and spirituality.
That's an interesting connection. Yeah. I don't know of it. I do know that the conquest of Istanbul by the Sultan in the 1450s caused all kinds of Greek-speaking Orthodox Christians to flee, leading up to the conquest, and after caused them to flee and germinate all over Europe, and that caused Orthodox sages like Gemistus Pletho to visit Florence, where he gave this Council of Florence and totally blew the minds of the Medicis, the bankers who ruled Florence at that time, to where they opened a Platonic Academy and started sending out their agents to everywhere that they could to dig up the old crusty manuscripts of pre-Christian thought, right? Because of this Greek influence, they decided they'd had enough of the church and decided to start digging into the pre-Christian culture of Greece and Rome. You got to think they're living in Italy, right? It's Florence. You can see the ruins of the Roman Empire all around you, and you realize that your own society doesn't have the engineering prowess to recreate like the Roman aqueducts. You just have to stare at their ruins and be like, it's like that Lord of the Rings feeling, like just of the feeling of great layers of history. Mm-hmm. Well, King Wenceslas was, of course, deposed from power in 1400, and the seat of the Holy Roman Empire moved onward. King Wenceslas became obsessed with some of the pre-Martin Luther, pre-Protestant Reformation revolutionaries, namely John Wycliffe in England. John Wycliffe was a man who got his hands on some copies of the Bible that were not in Latin, that were in languages he could read, and he used scripture to propose a stateless communist society in the late 14th century. Now, John Wycliffe had the good sense to die before the Vatican could get their hands on him. That he was excommunicated, 5 years or so after his death. But another guy, and here we return to Prague. We're going to be bouncing back and forth a lot between England and Prague. Why? Because Henry VIII, brought the Protestant Reformation to England. Like, England was the big Protestant power at the time, and the good people of Czechia were, they're always suspicious of authority. So this guy, Jan Hus, who he'd heard of John Wycliffe over in England, and he started advocating for very similar things. But when the Pope summoned him to Mainz for a conference, they just burnt him. And the people of Prague were so outraged that they just had their preacher burnt, that they engaged in, I think, what may be the first defenestration of Prague at what's weirdly called the New Town Hall. And this one, they chucked all of the Catholic administrators of the city out the windows, and to their death.
Nate, could you define defenestration?
Yeah. Obviously, English is this weird mixture of Latin and German, and we have the weird window word, but in German, a window is called a Fenster. And so defenestration means to chuck someone out of the window. And this is the treatment that the good people of Prague like to reserve for officials who come to town and try to tell them what religion they have to be. And so the defenestration of Prague, that first defenestration of Prague was a major incident. It got Wenceslas IV to be excited about Protestantism as it was evolving, and it got him deposed as Holy Roman Emperor. And the story quiets down for about 150 years here. And then we get to, I think the next thing we have to do is leave Prague for a second and travel back to Whitehall, into the court of Elizabeth I. Now, we all know Queen Elizabeth, right? She was the queen at the time that Shakespeare was writing his plays. And Queen Elizabeth had a court astrologer, magician, alchemist. The man was involved in creating the navigational instruments that permitted Britain to create a global naval empire and become a naval power, after defeating the Spanish Armada, famously in Elizabeth's time. Terence McKenna says that this man, whose name is John Dee, invented the navigational instruments that Sir Francis Drake used to map out the west coast of South America. So, not sure. I couldn't verify that, but that's what Terence McKenna says, and T-Mac's usually on the ball. So, Elizabeth I has this guy at her court named John Dee. Now, John Dee is a weird dude. He's like one of these polymath guys. He has this big house in Mortlake, which was then a village out in the outskirts of London. Now it's totally enveloped by the city. And the story of John, it's weird. The stories are different about how John Dee found this show stone. The word show stone spelled S-H-E-W. It's like a magical artifact. Some accounts have John Dee digging it up in his garden in Mortlake. Other accounts have Dee personally taking delivery of this thing from angels. Whatever the case may be, John Dee had this show stone, and you can go see this show stone. It is in the British Museum currently. It's not really a crystal ball. It looks more like a cast iron skillet. It has a handle that you could hang on a wall and would be kind of a mirror. The British Museum thinks it's originally of Aztec origin, so take that for what it's worth. But the thing about the show stone is it allowed John Dee to communicate with angels. It allows one to communicate with angels using this language that Dee formalized with the help of his assistant, a man by the name of Edward Kelly. Edward Kelly was a man who was missing one ear. In those days, if you were a con artist or a flim-flam artist, when you were found guilty, they'd lop one of your ears off so that if you meet someone who's a smooth talker with a big idea, you know, to keep your wallet in your pocket, right? So this guy, Edward Kelly, is one of those guys. He's got an ear missing. And he's the only one that can look into the showstone and receive the messages of the angels in this language, Enochian. And Terence McKenna says that they would get the messages backwards. So he would be telling John Dee what he's seeing in the showstone. John Dee would be writing it down, and then they formalize this Enochian language to translate it, right? So, like, what kind of a flim-flam artist is Edward Kelly that he has this capability to do this? Like, John Dee couldn't work the showstone without him. I don't understand. And the story gets even crazier because apparently the showstone vouchsafed a revelation to John Dee that he needed to sleep with Anne, who's John Dee's wife, right? So Edward Kelly, I think I said Dee both times, but Edward Kelly is like, sorry, man, the showstone's clear. I got to bang your wife. And we have John Dee's diaries, right? He wrote all this stuff down. And the quote in his diary is, and it was done. So this is just bizarre.
It sounds an awful lot like the origins of Scientology.
It does, doesn't it? It's really strange. So eventually, the alchemist John Dee and his assistant Edward Kelly decide that they need to tour the European continent to deepen their understanding of alchemy and attempt to figure out the secrets of how to turn, base metals into gold. And so, of course, their first stop was the court of Rudolf II, who was the guy who brought the Holy Roman Empire back to Prague. And the court of Rudolf II was the seat of the Holy Roman Empire. And Rudolf II ruled from Prague from 1576 to 1612. The story, what happened to Edward Kelly and John Dee at Prague Castle is very, very strange. They went there, and Rudolf II was a man who was very interested in magic and weird things. He brought all the alchemists and he brought every intellectual he possibly could to Prague. One example would be Tycho Brahe, the Danish astronomer. Like, there's three big Renaissance astrologers. There's Nicholas Copernicus, who first suggested that maybe the Earth orbits the sun and not vice versa. Published on his deathbed to avoid, the Inquisition. Tycho Brahe is the man who took down all of the data. He looked through his telescope and recorded everything. Tycho Brahe is buried at Our Lady of Tin, which is one of these beautiful cathedrals that's right there off the Old Town Square. And of course, Johannes Kepler was the man who then took Brahe's calculations and modified Copernicus's idea from circular orbits to elliptical orbits with dual foci. All right, and that way he was able to predict with perfect accuracy the dance of the planets and the sun and the moon, which was absolutely stunning. Years later, of course, those Kepler equations would be taken by Isaac Newton, another noted alchemist, and used to formalize the laws of gravitation that we still use to this day. So that was the court of Rudolf II. Edward Kelly and John Dee arrive, right? And Rudolf II charges them with the task, inevitably, of turning base metals into gold, right? Rudolf thinks he's going to get rich off of these guys. A year goes by, and then like another year, and they're not able to turn lead into gold. And so John Dee he throws Edward Kelly under the bus and abandons Edward Kelly, who's now imprisoned in Prague Castle, and leaves and heads off to live the rest of his life. And so now here's Edward Kelly, this weird dude, trying to escape from Prague Castle. And the legend of Edward Kelly's fate is that he climbed out of the windows of Prague Castle and up onto the red terracotta roof tiles that are so prominent in Prague when he lost his footing on a loose roof tile and tumbled to his death off the roof of Prague Castle. Brian, when you go to Prague, you're going to need to visit the Alchemy Museum. The Alchemy Museum is right next to Prague Castle and just a few steps away. And it's a shamelessly tawdry tourist trap.
Do you, how confident are you in the story that this man accidentally fell to his death in a city famous for throwing people out of windows?
Very unconfident. These legends are very, very strange. And I think you could even maybe find another version of the Edward Kelly legend. But if you go to the Alchemy Museum or you listen to your TMAC lectures on YouTube, the aforementioned Terence McKenna, you will hear the version where he slips on the roof tiles and falls to his death. Now, hilariously for me, the strange man who was giving the tour at the Alchemy Museum, I just want you to picture, at one point there's an anatomical skeleton, like something you would have in your biology class, and it's got wires tied to the wrists and feet, and so this man he's giving you this whole history of alchemy, and he's working the arms of the skeleton, and he's making it, It's really, I could barely, the man had a thick, Prague accent. I could barely tell what he was saying. And he was going on about this man who was missing an ear. And I was like, hey, that sounds a lot like Ed Kelly. The guy was like, we was been speaking on Ed Kelly. He was very upset. I was like, oh, sorry. I just can't really understand what you're saying. Sorry. So anyway, great museum. Lots of interesting things. They have a lot of interesting documents you can review there. So that's, and then the other thing about the court of Rudolph II is that he established housing for the alchemists. It's what's called the Golden Row. You can still go look at the Golden Row today. One of those little houses was later in the 20th century occupied by the famous author Franz Kafka. Have you guys heard this word Kafkaesque? Kafka wrote the Metamorphosis and the Trial and a couple other crazy stories about people that were stuck in endlessly bureaucratic cycles, just these nightmare stories. They're kind of postmodern. But anyway, you will see that Franz Kafka used to live in number 44. And you'll have a chance to visit his little enclave when you go there.
Watch out for the Beatles.
The Beatles? Like the Beatles meaning?
Oh, that's a deep cut to the Trial.
Ah, okay, gotcha. I thought you were talking about the band.
I'm sorry, I'm blanking. Not the Trial. Metamorphosis.
Yeah, okay. Sure. Yeah. Got it. Okay, so just to bounce back to England for just a brief second here. Well, I think we better start with we'll go back to England in a second. We better start with the most famous defenestration of Prague in history, and that occurred. Rudolph II dies in 1612, right after this whole crazy incident with John Dee and Edward Kelly. His brother Matthias takes over for 7 short years, and now that brings us up to 1618. And at the death of Matthias, Prague faces a crossroads, and I will now yield to the immortal words of legendary historians Will and Ariel Durant and just read their little spiel about what was happening with the death of Matthias. In Prague Castle, but in Prague, Count Heinrich von Thurn pleaded with the Protestant leaders to prevent the ardently Catholic Archduke Ferdinand from taking the throne of Bohemia. Emperor Matthias had left 5 deputy governors to administer the country during his absence. The governors overruled the Protestants in disputes against church building at Klostergrad and sent the objectors to jail. On May the 23rd, 1618, Thurn led a crowd of irate Protestants into Prague Castle, climbed to the rooms where the 2 of the governors sat, and threw them out the window, along with a pleading secretary. All 3 fell 50 feet, but they landed in a heap of filth and escaped more soiled than injured. That famous, quote, defenestration was a dramatic challenge to the emperor, to the archduke, and to the Catholic League. Thurn expelled the archbishop and the Jesuits and formed a revolutionary directory. He could hardly have realized that he had let slip the dogs of war. It's good writing. I love Will and Ariel Durant. And let slip the dogs of war he did. Obviously, those 3 administrators, the clerk, I guess, was a Protestant, but they chucked him too. Brian, I will put a pin in your map where the exact window is in Prague Castle where this took place. It's a very strange location. There are, within 20 feet, there's a huge bronze pyramid and 2 obelisks. A lot of weird magical symbolism right. This is like outside, this is on the outside of Prague Castle. But anyhow, we'll have to show you. It's really interesting. It was right next door to the enclosure where they ran the horses, and so there's a huge pile of manure. And the Catholics toppled into it. One guy broke his leg. No fatalities this time, not like the first defenestration. And the Catholic propaganda considered the salvation, these guys didn't die, as divine providence, divine salvation. The Protestant propaganda thought that the pile of manure they fell into was, a fit fate for any Catholic. So the 2 competing sides of the propaganda war, were working their printing presses after that incident.
Brian, it strikes me that on your trip to Prague, if it's at all possible, you should try to jump out of this window.
I'll see what I can do.
It's 50 feet off the ground, as mentioned by Messieurs and Mr. and Mrs. Durant. It will be a hell of a fall. There's no more manure to catch you. You would just fall and poof. Well, anyway, we all know the 30 Years' War ensued after that, and it was a battle for the soul of Europe. The Catholic Church would never recover. Importantly, during this time, I'm just going to back up a little bit here and return to the Court of Elizabeth in Whitehall in London. Now, of course, Elizabeth died in 1605, something like that. I can't quite remember what day she died. And she was succeeded by her son, James I of England and the 6th of Scotland. And James I had a daughter whose name was also Elizabeth. And one of the great alchemical love stories of all time is between Elizabeth, whose hand was and her betrothed. Her hand was promised to this guy, Frederick V, Elector Palatine of Bohemia, which means he's not the emperor, but he runs Prague. And this is after the Habsburgs had taken over control of the Holy Roman Empire. And we all remember the Habsburgs for controlling the Holy Roman Empire and later the Austro-Hungarian Empire. Interestingly, the Spanish branch of the family they all intermarried with each other to the point where they became so retarded, like literally, like they had the elongated Habsburg jaw, right? The last of their rulers would drool when he speak and couldn't even. He was just it's just a lot of inbreeding there. But that didn't happen to the German Habsburgs, but to the Spanish Habsburgs, that was their fate. Well, the Habsburgs did not take kindly to Prague revolting against the Pope and Catholicism, and so the Habsburgs sent a massive army to invade Prague, and this is what Frederick V expected. But he also was counting on the support of his father-in-law, James I of England, the man who's running the other big Protestant country, But James I left him and his daughter in the lurch, did not support the invasion, and so it was a total disaster. Elizabeth and Frederick became the Winter King and Queen because they ruled Prague for only 1 year. In 1620, the Battle of the Habsburgs arrived in Prague. The Battle of White Mountain ensued. Protestant forces lost, and the Catholics regained control of Prague. And to this day, Prague is not a Catholic state. It's like a third atheist, a third Catholic, and then a bunch of other religions. Protestantism all but disappeared during the counter-revolution that ensued once the Habsburgs regained control of Prague. Neither Frederick or Elizabeth were killed in the Battle of White Mountain. They repaired to the Netherlands where they lived out their life. Frederick died long before Elizabeth, and she had 13 of his kids. So, yeah, that's a hell of a story. The invasion of Prague has a fascinating tie-in, and that is that as this army moved across Germany, obviously the Habsburg armies had a lot of mercenaries. That wasn't uncommon in the day. Mercenaries were part of how you did business, and one of those sellswords was a gentleman by the name of René Descartes. He was a Frenchman, and at that time he was a young lad who was wenching and fighting his way across Europe as a member of this Habsburg army, and he was involved in the invasion and conquest of Prague. Terence McKenna has this idea. It would make a good book if Frederick V meets René Descartes, for a final duel in the alleyways of Prague. Now, why would René Descartes be? That would be like the Frederick V would have one possible future, and then René Descartes would have another possible future for Europe, and René Descartes is the European future we're living in. Because on the way back from Prague, René Descartes, during a heavy snowstorm, during a blizzard, shut himself up inside of a shed with a stove going. And there he had, his Wikipedia page calls it a case of exploding head syndrome. I don't know what that means, but what I do know is that René Descartes' testimony was that he was visited by 3 angels during this incident. And the angels told him that the conquest of nature was to be achieved through measure and number. The next morning he had the ideas for the philosophical underpinnings of all of Western civilization, cogito ergo sum, I think, therefore I am. And he also invented the coordinate system that we all learned in middle school and elementary school that still bears his name, the Cartesian coordinate system. So it's an interesting sidebar of this whole thing that he thought of all this on the way back from the Battle of White Mountain. and he said that angels delivered it to him. So now you've got John Dee, who apparently can talk to angels through Ed Kelly and his Showstone. And you've got René Descartes, having a case of exploding head syndrome and basically inventing Western civilization that day. Absolutely crazy.
It's interesting to me that so far your story now has 3 different examples of either navigation or astronomy technology or the thought technology required to map and navigate, all related somehow to Prague. I'm not sure if that's where your story's going, but
that's an interesting. No, I hadn't even thought of that connection. But you're right. Well, So that's the story of Prague and the Protestant Reformation. Obviously, in 1648, the Treaty of Westphalia was signed. The Treaty of Westphalia introduced this idea of international borders. The idea was, well, you, the Pope, we're not going to draw lines and we're going to carve up the entire world into someone's country. And you, the Pope, are not allowed to cross those lines and send your agents to try to tell us what religion we have to be. So you're going to be contained within the Papal States. And then the modern world was basically born in 1648. That was when the world the modern nation state was born. Before that, it was mostly city states. The countries as we understand them now were invented, during the negotiations that ended the War of 1812. So this is the War of 1812. Excuse me, the 30 Years' War. And I suppose two more things to mention here. Frederick V had the idea, he obviously came from Prague and took magic very seriously. He had the idea, now this is again according to Terence McKenna, and if you just read your history books, it'll be that Frederick V was on the side of the Protestants, but according to Terence McKenna, Frederick wanted to make Bohemia into an alchemical kingdom. And I don't know what that means, other than inside such a kingdom, it would not be a capital offense to try to make oneself like God, as the Hermetic texts say. So you can only imagine what kind of a civilization would have resulted. The other thing I'll mention is a modern story, and then I got one final quote from the Durants about the role of the 30 Years' War in modernity. This involves Václav Havel, who's a famous Czech politician from like the 80s and 90s. He was involved in the overthrow of communism and the Velvet Revolution, and then the splitting of Czechoslovakia into Czechia and Slovakia. This was his signature thing. And one of the great stories goes that in the late 80s, the Rolling Stones blew through Prague. And of course, they're going to hang out with Václav Havel. He invites them. Prague Castle is still the seat of government for Czechia. So when you go there, you will see they're like military officials and state officials. Will be there. So of course, Václav Havel is entertaining the Rolling Stones after the concert, and they're like smoking and drinking. And the Stones just thought that Prague Castle was too dark and needed to be lit up, and so they took the stage lights from their concert and surrounded Prague Castle in them. And if you go there today, these are the lights that still illuminate Prague Castle, 20, 30 years later. So just know when you see the castle all lit up at night, that's thanks to what's his face, the lead singer of the Rolling Stones,
Mick Jagger.
Mick Jagger. That's thanks to Mick Jagger and his band of Merry Pirates. So that's an interesting story. And okay, so that's all I've got to talk about Prague, Brian. You obviously there's going to be a couple of landmarks in there. You'll need to visit the National Gallery, Wenceslas Square, Old Town Square, New Town Square, Prague Castle, the Alchemy Museum, the Sex Machine Museum, which is like, I don't know, there's ads for it all over town. I didn't go, but I bet it's great. There's also Alphonse Mucha, the famous Art Deco or Art Noir. You know that like 18th century style or 19th century style that what do you call Art Nouveau? That's the word I'm looking for. The guy has unbelievable artwork. I didn't go to the Mucha Museum. You should definitely go to the Mucha Museum if you have time. Unbelievable art.
Brian, do you have restaurants picked out? I'm eager to hear your stories about eating in a foreign country.
Well, I found one place where, it just like a steak, it comes to, I think it was like $9. So I'm excited about eating there.
Mm-hmm.
But beyond that, I don't have any restaurants picked out, but I'm very excited to sample the European cuisine.
Yeah,
and
eat local, dude. Find some street food.
Is. Yeah. That's my plan.
Cool.
The exchange rate, at least in 2023, was about 66% of what prices cost here. So like your steak would be $16 or $17, which is, like I was saying to Brian, just the price you'd want to pay for a steak.
All right. Well, that was
I got one more quote here.
Okay.
So let me just finish. Let me just put the icing on the cake here with this quote from, of course, the Durants, the immortal Durants. They're now talking about the Treaty of Westphalia and the end of the 30 Years' War, and with these words. But though the Reformation had been saved, it suffered, along with Catholicism, from a skepticism encouraged by the coarseness of religious polemics, the brutality of the war, and the cruelties of belief. During the Holocaust, thousands of, quote, witches were put to death. Men began to doubt creeds that preached Christ and practiced wholesale fratricide. They discovered the political and economic motives that hid under religious formulas, and they suspected their rulers of having no real faith but the lust for power. Though Ferdinand II had repeatedly risked his power for the sake of his faith, even in this darkest of modern ages, an increasing number of men turned to science and philosophy for answers less incarnadined than those which the faiths had so violently sought to enforce. Galileo was dramatizing the Copernican revolution. Descartes was questioning all tradition and authority. Bruno was crying out to Europe from his agonies at the stake. The Peace of Westphalia ended the reign of theology over the European mind and left the road obstructed but passable for the tentatives of reason. Well, what do you think? Pretty good, eh? I mean, there are few cities in the world that are exciting to visit as Prague.
All kinds of crazy tie-ins from Charlemagne to Mick Jagger there. Huh?
Yeah. The story's a complex web. I think I got all the pieces. I don't think I missed any. But the thing that I just love about Prague is their rebellious attitude. When I visited, we were coming via overland in a car from Budapest. And I think probably Budapest is the most beautiful city I'll ever visit. It looks like it's all white marble, just beautiful. They redid it all in the 19th century. If you've ever seen a picture of the Hungarian Parliament building, it looks like music frozen in the air, like a frozen symphony. But the people of Budapest were on edge, and they just didn't seem. I mean, maybe you just have in order to make such a beautiful city, maybe you have to have a really, you don't let people color outside the lines. Maybe you have to be very strict. I don't know what it was. That's just the vibe I got from my 3-4 days there. But in Prague, I mean, well, there's a reason they call the Bob Dylan and Peter, Paul, and Mary, Greenwich Village in the 1960s Bohemian, or the Belle Epoque in Paris Bohemian. It's like people. There's some confusion with the Romani or the gypsies. There's some confusion in the early days. The word Bohemian derived this reputation when people weren't quite sure if they were Slavs from Bohemia or like gypsies, But nevertheless, Bohemian is it just gives you this hippy dippy sort of vibe, and that is what I found the people of Prague to be like. They were very laid back, not on edge like the Hungarians. Very laid back, excited for a party, and you can just see where the distaste of having authorities come to town and try to dictate your religion comes from. So, man, I'm really excited for you, Brian. You're going to have one epic trip out to Prague. I mean, the vibes there are something else. So I've said all of this, and I think that you should do a lengthy soliloquy when you get back and let me know what your impression was, where it differed, where it was the same.
All right. Well, obviously we try to embody the revolutionary spirit on this very podcast. So, we'll see. My love of history is not the same as yours, so I'll probably talk about food.
Well, I did think that Will and Ariel Durant quote that I just read, a lot of that sounds familiar. People losing faith in the current regime and starting to turn their attention to alternatives. It feels a lot like our present moment, and that's why I connected so emotionally with the history of Prague. Now, all that stuff seeps into the bricks and mortar of that city. I mean, the vibes are still there. The great drama of the Battle of White Mountain and the love story of Frederick and Elizabeth and the strife that just tore Europe apart for 30 years. I mean, it sends willies up and down my spine.
Well, I ship out tomorrow, and it'll be very exciting, and I can't wait to come back with a full report.
Hell yeah, man. All right. Well, lads, is there anything else to add before we put a bow on this wonderful podcast?
Brian, I simply encourage you to continue to simp for yourself. Order the weirdest thing on the menu. Go have a great time. Have fun. Do some history. Do some eating. Do some drinking. Enjoy.
Yeah.
All right. I can't wait. Yeah.
Well, folks, this is usually the moment when I invite you to log on to nop.substack.com. There you can read weekly essays written by yours truly, and you can even, if you so desire, put in your email address so you'll receive them all in your email inbox and you'll never have to miss one. And if you have any comments about the glorious city of Prague or about how Brian should simp for himself, then please send us an email at nop@substack.com, and we shall be sure to read it.
All right, see you, folks.
Take care, everyone.
Live long and prosper.